How many Mr. Pickles will it get? Let's see if this cabinet has what it takes.
Video Game Vegas.
He's so cute.
Friends, Video Game Vegas, and this is my review of the 3/4 scale Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, the Model N, brought to us by ArcadeModUp and Game Room Solutions. I base my arcade cabinet reviews on 10 categories, which you'll find detailed in the text below. For each positive in a category, or more positive than negative in a category, I'll score it a Mr. Pickle. The more Mr. Pickles it gets, of course, the better. Based upon my total score and my overall thoughts, I'll recommend if you should get it, vet it, or in other words, put it through its paces in person before you buy, or forget it. A couple of disclaimers before I get into my review. All my product reviews are based solely upon the item or items I receive. Some may get the same product and have no issues. Some may have more issues than I did. And maybe I get no issues at all, my hope for any product. Or maybe a majority of the specific product performs or presents differently than the one I got. But when it comes down to it, what I get is what I review. I don't acquiesce to excuses like, I must have gotten a bad one, or a good one, or ruminate shipping issues if I had it shipped, though I may note something. But plainly put, I'm an advocate for good quality with a strong emphasis towards quality control. And if a company wants their product seen favorably, then they need to make this a paramount part of their philosophy and put it to action, so what every customer receives is an acceptable, if not preferred, exceptional experience every time. Some may think it unfair not to put a more significant emphasis on the law of averages, and I appreciate that opinion. But my reviews are meant to tell my experience on exactly what I got, good or bad. Second, the footage presented in my videos of Arcade Cabinet's iReviewer showcase may contain updated parts, decorations, software, or other bits and bobs not included in a standard purchase. Please make sure to check advertised listings or reach out to retailers or companies to confirm complete contents in box. Now let's get to it. The Grail, a term often used when conveying something most sought after in a collection. I think the term Grail, and similar terms like it, dream acquisition, pinnacle, crown jewel, etc., are sometimes overused. But when it comes to collecting machines for a home arcade, I think it's often justified due to the significant feelings and memories many of these games gave us. I think back to all the times I was dazzled in my youth, seeing certain arcade cabinets that sparked an almost intangible feeling of joy, and dreaming of the next time I could see and play them again. And I remember the feeling of absolute elation when a company called ArcadeModUp came onto the scene, offering smaller and lighter form factor, consumer grade, and licensed arcade machines, fashioned after their bigger brother brethren, allowing more people to envision an actual arcade space in their home. And I feel fortunate they were able to make many of the ones I considered grails in this new form factor. They crafted my favorite arcade machine of all time, Atari Star Wars, and arguably the most beautiful and eye-catching cabinet to ever grace an arcade, Tron. So many others came to fruition as well, but as a lot of us soon found out, one company alone couldn't satisfy this new dream. ArcadeModUp's lack of care in many of their creations, licensors not willing to jump into the game, or any other number of factors, left many fans disappointed when some of their most sought-after titles didn't come out, or if they did, didn't deliver an acceptable quality. And how long should someone have to wait to get a decent licensed consumer-grade version of an arcade cabinet they love? The people who grew up with and want these amazing machines aren't going to be around forever, so the time to bring them out is now, or more importantly, yesterday. Money is being left on the table because all the necessary players won't come together and make the magic happen. So what do? And in my case, for someone who doesn't want larger commercial-grade arcade cabinets. There are many avenues, of course, and the initial step I took, after my less than favorable experience with my first ArcadeModUp machine, was to purchase and mod a generic 3/4 scale cabinet and create my own. I chose one from a company called Rec Room Masters and skinned it to look like one of my must-have arcade titles, Berserk. I had to buy all the guts and set up some of the software, but it gave me one of my first dream cabinets. It was a lot of work, and I hoped I wouldn't have to do it again. Fortunately, other companies picked up what ArcadeModUp was putting down and stepped into the licensed 3/4 scale arena. Unico brought the fire with a big red Neo Geo cabinet with 50 games. And iiRcade made a splash with their excellent Space Ace cabinet, where one could add more games to it via an online store. But even with these beauties, and some others like them, there were still so many titles people wanted, and a lot of us realized that playing the waiting game for a licensed version might just have us waiting forever. That wasn't going to cut it for me. There were 3 cabinets I still hoped for: Donkey Kong, Hydro Thunder, and House of the Dead. But if I could only have one, it was going to be the Kong. Donkey Kong is a highly requested cabinet in the home arcade community, a grail to many. And though some claim to know the reason why it hasn't released in a licensed 3/4 scale form, most notably to ArcadeModUp, something about Nintendo never licensing out their properties, which in itself is bullshit, because they have with other companies in the past. It could very well be the reason here, but it's still speculation. I've never seen definitive proof, only hearsay. Given the many products I purchased from ArcadeModUp, I'll offer up my own possible theory, based upon my many experiences with them. And let me be doubly clear, this is only a theory, and not a confirmation of fact. Though ArcadeModUp, on the rare occasion, has knocked it out of the park with a great product, their less than stellar emphasis to quality, by often skimping on essential features, or acting in ways at times that don't show proper respect to the amazing titles they put onto their machines, Nintendo might not want to take a chance having one of their properties find its way onto a substandard product. But whatever the case may be, I wasn't going to sit around waiting for a licensed cab that may never come out. My home arcade vision wanted a Donkey Kong. I chanced upon a site called ArcadeModUp. Yes, it sounds very close to ArcadeModUp, who sold fully functional and unlicensed arcade cabinet kits. They had a cabinet type that was classically shaped to look like some of the original Nintendo commercial machines, like Donkey Kong, Mario Brothers, and Popeye. It was called the Model N. You could choose your artwork, which would be pre-applied, so you wouldn't have to install it yourself, and the whole package came with everything you needed to get up and running right after building it. A monitor, speakers with amp, a fully assembled control panel with joystick, buttons, and a trackball, and a Raspberry Pi 4 installed with 6,000 some games. The only real cabinet design difference other than the riser between ArcadeModUp and what you'd find on a commercial machine was the Model N didn't have that classic recessed monitor. The Model N had plexi mounted directly over the monitor like you'd find on an ArcadeModUp. But even with that difference, this was still a great representation of a Donkey Kong machine, look-wise, and it gave me enough feels to pass as one. ArcadeModUp also offered an option one could purchase that would replace the included light-up marquee with an actual monitor. This would allow the marquee to change to match the game you were playing. I've always wanted something like that, and the upgrade only cost $99, so I was in. And it was a great time to buy the cabinet as well, as it was on sale, normally priced at $999.99, in other words, $1,000. But at the time I bought mine, it was $799.99, $800 rounded up of course, and it included free shipping. And that may sound a bit steep compared to the average price of an Arcade 1-Up, but it looked to have some better specs to justify it. It was well past time for me to get a Donkey Kong cabinet in my home arcade, and I definitely wanted to do it before I shed off this mortal coil. So did this cabinet pay off for me? Let's find out. The look of the cabinet. The artwork is stellar, and the shape of the cabinet is fantastic. This is a Donkey Kong cabinet, and because of the way the cabinet pieces together, with no screw holes present on the outside, it makes the graphics look as clean as something you'd find on an iiRcade. It also uses true T-molding, and because ArcadeModUp allows you to choose the color, I got white to mirror the color scheme of a commercial machine. The front of the cabinet has two speaker grill cutouts instead of the one found on a commercial cabinet. This is due to the home cabinet having stereo speakers. And I like the creative license ArcadeModUp took by adding Donkey Kong barrel graphics over them. At first I thought I might not like this choice, but they really make the cabinet pop. And there is a riser on this cabinet, thank goodness. And though the art on the riser doesn't continue the blue on the cabinet, the artwork is a fantastic choice, featuring an emblazoned Donkey Kong logo on the front. The only bummer, what I mentioned before, is no recessed screen. This missing feature does break the full immersion of a commercial arcade experience, but the bezel graphics are thankfully spot on, making it Donkey Kong enough that when I walk into my home arcade, I see a Donkey Kong machine, and that's what really matters. As I mentioned before, the machine does come with a light-up marquee. I actually tried it out before putting on the final side panel of the cabinet, because I wanted to see how it looked. It looks incredible. No hot spots or fading, and is very clean. I of course chose to go with the marquee with the built-in monitor option, which I'll go over more in my picture quality section. But when the machine is turned off, it looks black. But it does have some Donkey Kong bezel art, so it doesn't look like a total void. Now one last quick point about the artwork before I move on. Out of the box, there were no flaws, no nicks or scratches, perfect and beautiful. However, because of the issues putting the cabinet together, which we'll get into now, some of the artwork was damaged during the building process, and I'm a bit miffed at that. Cabinet structure and assembly. Boy oh boy, where do I begin? I thought putting together an Arcade 1-Up was horrible, but nothing could have prepared me for the absolute nightmare of putting together ArcadeModUp's Model N. Before I purchased the Model N, ArcadeModUp had an assembly video for the cab, since taken down, not sure why, showing how to put it together. It used the cam lock system, which I was initially happy to see, as iiRcade used that building method as well, and if you've seen any of my reviews for the iiRcade, you'll know what an absolute joy putting one together is. But as I was to soon find out, camlock builds don't automatically make something easy or well put together. I did feel a small bit of concern that the video didn't show them installing the second side panel, a piece that some feel is the worst part of putting together an Arcade 1-Up. Attaching the side panel on the Model N was the most rage-inducing thing I've ever encountered building a 3/4 scale cab. I almost threw the whole thing in the garbage. It was so bad, in fact, that it made Arcade 1-Up's method seem like magic. All the holes for the cams on the cabinet pieces were drilled a bit too small, meaning you couldn't just push them in. I had to use a rubber mallet and force them in. And I'm so glad this method worked, because I didn't want to have to make adjustments using a drill. Suffice it to say, it was a long and tiring effort to install them all. Then there was the problem with the front kickplate panel. The grooves on the outer side panels where it needed to fit into weren't cut long enough. I decided to see if I could use the rubber mallet to force it in enough to support the cabinet structure. Thankfully it worked, but it wasn't an exact fit. Using this method caused the damage I mentioned before to some of the artwork. Not horribly so, but enough to bother me when I focus on it. And that's not the only issue this caused. Since the front panel couldn't fit all the way into the grooves, it left enough of a gap in the cabinet to affect the control deck, not allowing it to fit snug. It causes the deck to wobble slightly during play. It doesn't hinder the actual gameplay, but it's still annoying. And now we gotta talk about the inside of the cabinet, with its absolute rat's nest of cabling. Holy hell. Plugging in one thing often caused another thing to come loose. Just a mess of wires. And some of those cables that came loose were attached to the pre-wired control deck. After getting the whole cabinet together, I found that some of the buttons wouldn't work. I flipped up the control deck, a cool design choice, allowing one to get to the amp to adjust the volume without having to go through the back of the cabinet. And I found some of the cables to the buttons were disconnected. I plugged them back in, but the slightest graze would disconnect them again due to insufficient or no crimping. The button cables they used weren't the ones that click into place after you install them. They were the crimp type, and because they weren't crimped tight enough, they could easily fall off. So every time I do want to adjust the volume, I have to be extra careful so the control deck cables don't come loose. Now let's get to the riser, its own exercise in frustration. Whereas the cam holes on the cabinet pieces were too small, the ones on the riser pieces were too big. And just to note, all the cams that came with the machine were all the same size, so I didn't make a mistake using the wrong cams for the wrong parts. And because the cam holes were so big on the riser pieces, the cams kept falling out as I awkwardly tried to hold the panels together to get them to assemble. I was eventually able to get it together, but what a pain. ArcadeModUp's Model N is the worst engineered cabinet I've ever seen. I know I've given ArcadeModUp a hard time in the past, but the Model N is not even in ArcadeModUp's league. The Model N is a true example that not everyone can just go out and create a decent arcade cabinet. It took me over 9 hours to put the Model N together, the longest build time of any of my machines. Physical controls. Like I mentioned before, the cabling for the buttons were an issue, as was the control deck wobble. Before I bought the Model N, I reached out to ArcadeModUp to inquire about restrictor gates on the joystick. Because they were also a parts company and pre-wired everything for their builds, I hoped they could ship me one with an octagonal gate pre-installed, if there wasn't already. They let me know the Model N came with a square gate, which anyone who knows me knows I absolutely hate square gates because they feel nothing like what I remember playing in commercial arcades. I asked them if they could change out the gate and install an octagonal one before shipping, but they let me know they wouldn't be able to do that, and they said I could make any modifications I wanted once I got the machine. Suffice it to say, I purchased an octagonal gate from Amazon and installed it myself. And anyone who's watched some of my other reviews knows, if I have to replace anything on a machine, it loses a Mr. Pickle in that category. Thus, it loses one here. The joystick and trackball are decent enough, and the buttons are satisfactory, though nothing to write home about. And I think it's cool the buttons light up. Not a feature I need, but a nice touch. Picture quality. The Model N comes with a respectable 19-inch monitor with good display uniformity. It does lean towards the bright side, less contrasty, but without washing out. The viewing angles are okay, not top of the line, but satisfactory, without producing any discoloration or unacceptable fade. The picture looks decent standing anywhere in my home arcade. As for the marquee monitor I chose, it looks great. The picture quality is so convincing that I feel like I'm looking at an actual light-up marquee. I do want to mention though, on some of the marquee images, it looks like a slight light bleed is coming from the top of the monitor. I'm leaning towards this not being an issue with the monitor itself, as I don't see this happening on every marquee image. I'm thinking it may be the quality of some of the images ArcadeModUp chose, but I think it's important enough to point out because some may be interested in this marquee monitor over the included static light-up marquee. Even when I do happen to notice this effect, it's so minute to me that I don't find myself fixating on it. But I wanted to make folks aware, as stuff like this can be a deal breaker for some. Sound. The Model N sounds great, except for a speaker crackle that happens every 10 seconds. Now the crackle itself is pretty quiet, and can be drowned out by the sounds of my other arcade machines, but it's still annoying and shouldn't be there. I contacted ArcadeModUp support to see if they could help, and they had me swap out an audio cable with one I had lying around. Unfortunately, this didn't fix the issue, so they ended up sending me out a full replacement amp along with new speaker wires and a new audio cable. When I tested the replacement equipment outside of the machine first to make sure everything worked before wiring it all back inside, it resolved the issue. No more crackle. But after getting everything back into the machine, the crackle came back. I soon realized this wasn't something support could fix with just parts. It was a design flaw with the cabinet itself. The cause of the crackle was due to the amp being located too close to the unshielded speakers, which caused the magnetic feedback sound, the crackle. I may have been able to get rid of it by repositioning the amp lower into the cabinet, maybe at the bottom, but then I wouldn't be able to easily adjust the volume any longer. This should have been tested in the design phase of the cabinet and not passed along to the customer. Games and gameplay. Back when ArcadeModUp came out, and they welcomed the community to suggest new cabinets for them to consider, I pitched them my idea for a Donkey Kong cabinet. I wanted to see 5 games included on it: Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., Donkey Kong 3, Popeye, and Mario Brothers. As time went on, and no hint from ArcadeModUp of a Donkey Kong, it prompted me to search for another solution, which of course is the basis of this review, the Model N cabinet. I wanted to make sure the Model N included these 5 games, and that the games played well on their system. ArcadeModUp confirmed this was the case, and when I got mine, I concur. It's a terrific experience. But for $800, I wanted more than just 5 games. And thankfully the Model N delivers the goods, boasting 6,000 some titles. I got amazing versions of Dolphin Blue, Rygar, Frogger, Gorf, Demon Front, Phoenix, Golden Axe, and a multitude of others I ended up adding to the machine's favorites list. But it must be said though, this is not a highly curated experience. Like many other large library collections, this is pretty much a ROM dump. Not among the worst I've seen, but still disappointing considering ArcadeModUp said they had done a lot of customization to this build. There are games that don't play well, and some that won't play at all. Also being a typical ROM dump, not all games are configured correctly, especially the trackball ones. Some trackball games are set up fine and use the trackball, while other trackball games, and some ideal for trackball use, like some of the ones that use a spinner, are set to the joystick. No rhyme or reason. And don't even attempt to play a trackball game like Golden Tee, where you have to thrust the trackball forward. If you do, be prepared to smack your fingers into the monitor plexi, a painful lesson I quickly learned. Still, this is a decent collection, with enough working games to satisfy almost anyone. It does for me. Customer support. ArcadeModUp support is responsive and friendly. You do have to keep on them though, so they stay engaged, but they never turn me away. And though they couldn't fix the sound issue due to the limitations of the cabinet design, they still gave it their best. I contacted them a lot during this experience, before my purchase and well after I received it, and I'm happy to say they've earned their Mr. Pickle here. And I also made a discovery during my email interactions with them. Each one of their emails came from a Game Room Solutions account. They told me both ArcadeModUp and the company Game Room Solutions were both them. They said they split their business into two sites, each focused on a certain aspect. They told me one site was more for mods, and the other one was more for full arcade kits, though many of their products showed up on both sites. At the time I bought my Model N, it was available for purchase from both Game Room Solutions and ArcadeModUp. As of the making of this video, I found the Model N is now only available on the ArcadeModUp site, with only a reference to the dimensions of the cabinet on the Game Room Solutions site, which if you click on it, leads to a broken link. So if you're looking for this cabinet now, head to the ArcadeModUp site. Other annoyances beyond what I've already discussed? Unfortunately, yes. My first and biggest gripe is the lack of care taken to make sure all the images used for the marquees are correct and there. Now, I kind of expected there might be a few missing here and there, but as I played more games, it started to feel like a crapshoot to what I was going to get. Games with missing marquees default to a generic multicade graphic, and some marquees aren't even the known ones you'd actually see in most arcades, instead some alternate publisher crap. For example, the ones they have for Gyrus and 1942, I've never even seen before. These games are so iconic, and it's more than disappointing not to have the ones I grew up with represented. Though I guess it's not a total issue with 1942, since the game plays like absolute garbage on the Model N, and I'll never load it again. It feels like ArcadeModUp just found a batch of marquee graphics somewhere on the web and just threw it onto their build without checking. This is disappointing for someone who opted for their optional marquee monitor. The next thing is a weird decision to set each game to fill the whole screen, stretching the image of some games, making them look ridiculous to me, like Donkey Kong for instance. ArcadeModUp claimed at one point that this was preferable to most people, but I think they may have realized how lazy it was, because they released a step-by-step video on how to change the resolution for each game one at a time. But like the Model N cabinet build tutorial, I can't find this video anywhere anymore. Not sure what happened. Either I'm not looking in the right place, I did check all their current videos during the making of this review, or maybe it could have something to do with their warning to follow their instructions closely, as adjusting these settings can cause major issues if you accidentally change something else, which can easily happen with the software they're using if you're not careful. It may have caused them a support nightmare. Conjecture, of course, but I really miss and appreciate that video. I use this process to fix many games, like Donkey Kong Jr., and Donkey Kong 3, because they just looked weird to me stretched. If I was to give ArcadeModUp Game Room Solutions some advice here, since this build is used in some of their other products, not just their cabs, I'd say to consider a less is more approach when it comes to the number of games on the system. Yes, it's cool to see 6,000 games on a machine, but if some don't work well or at all, or if people are spending time configuring stuff over playing, then the large number of games becomes less impressive. I'd say consider cutting down the list to around 500 or maybe 1,000 games, and then take the time to make sure each one plays, sounds, and represents the way it should. Only include games that can achieve this performance on said system. Now the final issue I have, which may not seem like a big deal to some, but ended up being a huge deal for me, was the placement of the power button. It's located at the bottom left-hand side in the back of the cabinet, pretty much impossible to turn on where I have the machine placed. And tipping the machine to get to it isn't ideal either, given the cabinet's problematic structure due to the forced wedged-in front panel on mine. So I had to jury-rig my own solution, plugging the plug strip the cabinet uses for power into a secondary power switch that's easily accessible, then plugging it into one of my UPSs. Not pretty, but it works. I think more companies should take the approach ArcadeModUp does, placing the power button on the control panel itself. Simple, but genius. However, it should be noted that it is not recommended to shut down the Model N by just using the power switch. ArcadeModUp warns of a possible corruption that may happen if the software isn't shut down properly first, which could result in the machine becoming inoperable. They provide an easy step-by-step instruction on how to do it, and though it is a bit annoying, it's not unheard of on Pi systems, and I'd rather do the extra steps to keep my machine safe. This is also why I put my Model N on a UPS, to protect it against impromptu shutdowns during power failure. But if you do get corruption on your build, ArcadeModUp can send you out a new one on a micro SD card for an extra fee. I think the price was around $60 back when I purchased my machine. Thankfully, I haven't had to replace mine yet. Is the cabinet fun? Hell to the yes. Playing Donkey Kong on my own Donkey Kong machine is a treat. So many other great games as well, and the changing marquee, when it displays the right image, adds to the excitement. I'm glad to have another fun multicade in my collection. Value for price? Hell to the no. With all the issues this cabinet has, there is no way someone should pay $800 for this, let alone $1,000. For those who just want a capable multicade, I think $200 is more than a fair price for this, with free shipping. For those who are die-hard Donkey Kong fans, $300 with free shipping might be justifiable due to the amazing look of the cabinet. As for the marquee monitor upgrade, I can absolutely recommend that, especially at $99, a great price. Even though ArcadeModUp software doesn't include an image for every game, or some with questionable artwork, when the Model N does get it right, it brings a smile to my face every time. So, adding up the tally of all the categories, how many Mr. Pickles does ArcadeModUp and Game Room Solutions Model N Donkey Kong cabinet get? 5 Mr. Pickles out of 10. Vet it. This is going to be a tough one, folks, since I can't fully recommend buying this cabinet until you see and try it out for yourself. Where can you begin? I had a good experience with their customer support, so you may want to consider reaching out to them and see if they attend any trade shows or gaming conventions. Maybe they show off this particular cabinet at one of those events. You might even inquire if they allow people to visit their offices. Maybe request a demo of the build process if they do, and see if the effort to put one of these together is worth it. In any case, I implore anyone considering this cabinet to seek it out in person before laying down any cash. Now, I can't speak to other cabinet options offered by ArcadeModUp and Game Room Solutions, but I can tell you after my experience with the Model N, I won't be purchasing any more cabinets from them. I don't trust the research and development prowess of the company, or if outsourced, the company or companies they use. The Model N is a disaster when it comes to its structural engineering, and the lack of curation regarding its software and games to make sure everything feels right takes one away from playing to wasting time configuring. In all cases, though, seek out many reviews for any cabinet you're interested in, especially from people you trust. Make sure you're always well informed before making any purchase. I hope this and all of my reviews help you and others out. My hope for the future is to see everyone get licensed versions of 3/4 scale cabinets they want, whether it's Donkey Kong or any other Grail cabinet. If you love ArcadeModUp, I hope they make it. If it's another company, equally so. But regardless of who brings it out, I'd like to see it done with acceptable quality in all the right places, showing respect for the games and the ones who love them, and at a fair price. I think that's something we all deserve. And don't let the naysayers, or the ones who claim they know what companies are going to do, stop you from asking for cabinets you want. Unless someone can provide you with definitive proof that something isn't going to happen, consider it just part of the conversation and continue to dream and let your voice be heard. It's an amazing time for the home arcade hobby, and let's continue critiquing and celebrating it. For those who would like to see more of what this cabinet looks like, I've left a link below to my home arcade tour video, Welcome to the Video Game Vegas Arcade. There you can see it at more angles and perspectives. And with that, safe travels everyone. And remember, you always have a right to your opinion, but only I have a right to mine. Until next time, stay wiggly, my friends.